My daughter-in-law served me soup at dinner and whispered to my son, "The soup has something special in it just for her." I smiled and switched our bowls when she wasn't looking. I recorded everything. An hour later, she was rushed to the hospital screaming, and the police were waiting for her. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The overhead lights in the waiting room were too bright, bleaching the color from the cheap upholstered chairs. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, a calm point in the center of the sterile chaos. Down the hall, behind a set of swinging doors, a different kind of storm was happening. I could hear the raised, frantic voices of medical personnel, the rapid beep of a machine, the harsh rustle of curtains being drawn. A young doctor in blue scrubs burst out, his eyes scanning the empty space until they landed on me. He strode over, his brow furrowed. "Are you with the Reynolds woman? The one who came in by ambulance?" I nodded. "I am. I called them." "What happened?" he asked, his voice clipped with professional urgency. "What did she ingest? We need to know to treat her effectively. Her husband is too distraught to form a coherent sentence." I looked past his shoulder toward the source of the commotion. My voice was even, quieter than the surrounding noise. "I believe she can tell you herself." He stared at me for a second, confused by my response, then turned and hurried back through the doors. I remained seated. The plastic seat was hard and unyielding. I thought about my own kitchen chair, the one with the cushioned seat I had reupholstered myself last spring. That was where it began, 48 hours ago. The contrast was almost absurd. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. David had asked if he and Vanessa could come over. He said Vanessa wanted to try a new recipe on me. I should have heard the warning in that phrase, but I only heard my son's hopeful voice, wanting his wife and his mother to bond. So I said yes. My home was clean and quiet that afternoon, filled with the soft golden light of a fading day. I had set the table with my everyday china, the one with the small blue rim. It was practical, not too formal. I was in the kitchen finishing a salad when they arrived. Vanessa entered first, a vision of curated charm. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume a cloud of jasmine and sandalwood that felt invasive. "Ellie, you look well," she said, her eyes doing a quick, appraising sweep of the room. I knew, and of me. David followed, carrying a large pot. He leaned in for a proper hug. "Something smells good, Mom, but wait until you taste what Vanessa made." "It's just a humble leek and potato soup," Vanessa demurred, taking the pot from him and setting it on my stove. "But I used a very special stock, a family secret." She smiled at me, and it never reached her eyes. They remained flat like two chips of dark glass. We sat down. David ladled the soup, steam rising in fragrant swirls. He served Vanessa first, then me, then himself. The bowls were identical. Mine was placed directly in front of me. Vanessa watched the placement with a focus I found peculiar. "I hope it's to your taste, Ellie," she said, picking up her spoon. "I really took my time with it." We began to eat. The soup was creamy, well seasoned. I commented on its richness. David beamed, pleased with this détente. Vanessa's smile was a thin, satisfied line. Then, under the cover of David asking me a question about a neighbor, she leaned toward him. Her voice was a low, intimate murmur meant only for his ears, but the table was small, and I have always had excellent hearing. The words were clear, a soft poison dart. "The soup has something special in it, just for her." My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. A cold, sharp clarity pierced the warm, domestic haze of the evening. It was not a joke. The tone was one of grim triumph. I saw David's profile. He was chuckling softly, nudging her with his elbow as if she'd said something cheeky and affectionate. He had not heard the words. He had only heard his wife's conspiratorial whisper and assumed it was harmless. In that suspended second, several things happened at once. My mind, the one that had spent decades organizing information and observing children in a library, snapped into a state of absolute operational calm. The betrayal was a clinical fact, not yet an emotional wound. The threat was identified. The response had to be immediate and undetectable. I lowered my spoon. "Oh, my napkin," I said, my voice sounding pleasantly flustered. I looked down at my lap where my linen napkin sat perfectly folded. "I've dropped it." I pushed my chair back and bent down. The floor under the table was shadowed. From my pocket, I retrieved my smartphone. My movements were smooth, practiced. I opened the voice recording app with one thumb and tapped the red circle. A tiny counter began to run. I placed the phone screen down on the seat of my chair, concealed by the draped tablecloth. As I straightened up, I gave a small sigh. Silly me, it was right here. I smiled at them both, a grandmother's mild, apologetic smile. David grinned back. Vanessa's gaze was impatient, fixed on my bowl. Then I reached for my water glass with my left hand. "This soup is quite warming," I said, taking a sip. With my right hand, I casually switched my bowl with Vanessa's. Our spoons were already in them. The bowls were the same. It was the work of a second. A simple rotation on the smooth wood of the table. Vanessa, watching David to ensure he was still distracted, did not see it. David was looking at me. "More bread, Mom?" "No, thank you, dear." I picked up my spoon again, but now I was eating from the bowl originally meant for Vanessa. I took a deliberate bite. "It's truly delicious, Vanessa. You must give me the recipe." My heart was a steady, slow drum in my chest. Vanessa watched me swallow, and her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. A tiny knot of tension released. She picked up her own spoon, the spoon in the bowl I had just vacated, the bowl with the special ingredient, and began to eat with gusto, celebrating her own cleverness. "I'm so glad you like it," she said, and for the first time that night, her smile seemed genuine. She took several large spoonfuls. David, happy at the peaceful scene, dug into his own portion. We made polite conversation for the next 10 minutes. I ate slowly, savoring the safe soup. Vanessa finished hers quickly, urging David to have more from the pot. I watched her, this woman who had married my son and now saw me as an obstacle to be removed. I felt a sorrow then, deep and cold, for David. But atop that sorrow sat a layer of pure, sharp resolve. She had declared a war. I had just chosen my weapon. The recording app on the phone in my chair continued its silent digital vigil, capturing the clink of spoons, the mundane chatter, and the one damning whisper that had started it all. I sat at my table, in my home, and I waited for the poison to find its intended target. The first sign was a slight tremor in Vanessa's hand. She was in the middle of a story about a colleague's promotion, her voice bright and performative, when her spoon clattered against the rim of her bowl. She stopped, looking down at her hand, as if it belonged to someone else. "Clumsy," she said with a forced laugh, but the word came out tight. David, ever the doting husband, reached over and patted her wrist. "Long week, honey." She nodded, but her eyes had lost their sharp focus. A sheen of sweat appeared on her upper lip, glistening under the kitchen pendant light. I continued to eat my soup, one deliberate spoonful at a time. The recording device, still active on the chair beneath me, was now capturing a different audio landscape, the growing strain in her breathing. "I feel," Vanessa began, then stopped. She pressed a hand to her abdomen. "I feel very warm all of a sudden." The soup was hearty, I offered, my tone neutral. "Perhaps a glass of water." She ignored me, her gaze darting to my bowl, then to hers, a frantic calculation starting behind her eyes. The color was draining from her face, leaving a waxy pallor. "David," she said, and his name was a gasp. He turned fully toward her, his smile fading. "Vanessa, what's wrong?" "Dizzy." She tried to stand, pushing back from the table. Her legs buckled, and she caught herself on the chair back, knocking it against the wall. The sound was jarring in the quiet room. My heart. It's racing. I rose then, not with haste, but with purpose. I moved to the sink and filled a glass with cool water. "Here, drink this." She swatted at the glass, her coordination gone. Water splashed across the floor. "No, something's wrong." Her voice climbed into a register of pure panic. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the cold recognition there. The plan had reversed. The target had shifted. Her expression morphed from physical distress to abject horror. David was on his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "Mom, what's happening?" He was looking at me, as if I, the retired librarian, held a medical answer. "I don't know," I said, placing the glass on the counter. "But she needs help." I walked to the landline phone mounted on the wall, my steps measured. My pulse was steady. This was the next logical step. Vanessa began to gag. She stumbled toward the hallway, one hand clutched at her throat, the other braced against the wall. A dry, wrenching sound escaped her. David rushed to her side, trying to support her, his face a mask of confusion and fear. I picked up the phone and dialed 911. The call connected after 2 rings. 911, "What is your emergency?" a calm, professional voice asked. "I need an ambulance at 2147 Willow Lane. My daughter-in-law has suddenly become violently ill. She is dizzy, nauseous. Her heart is racing." I watched as Vanessa slid down the wall into a crumpled heap on the floor, David crouching beside her, repeating her name. "Is she conscious? Is she breathing?" the dispatcher asked. "She is conscious but disoriented. Her breathing is rapid." I paused, then added the crucial detail, my voice infused with just the right amount of hesitant concern. "We were having dinner. She made the soup. Just before she fell ill, I heard her whisper something to my son about the soup having something special in it. I don't know what she meant, but she's the only one who ate that particular bowl." I relayed the address again and hung up. The words hung in the air, a seed planted. David heard me. He looked up from where he cradled Vanessa's head, his eyes wide with a new, dawning terror. Not just fear for her, but fear of her. "What did you say?" he whispered. "The ambulance is on its way," I replied, avoiding the question. I fetched a kitchen towel, ran it under cold water, and brought it over. Kneeling beside them, I pressed the cool cloth to Vanessa's forehead. Her skin was clammy. Her eyes, rolling and unfocused, locked onto mine. I held her gaze. There was no triumph in my expression, only a grave, observant calm. In that silent exchange, everything was communicated. She knew I knew. She knew the switch had been made. The poison coursing through her veins was her own. She tried to speak, a guttural sound. Her hand flailed, fingers curling as if to claw at me. David caught her wrist, mistaking the gesture for delirium. "Shh! Help is coming, it's okay!" The sirens wailed in the distance, growing rapidly louder. Soon, red and blue lights strobed through the front window, painting the walls of my home in urgent color. The paramedics were efficient, a blur of green uniforms and brisk questions. I repeated my story succinctly. Sudden onset of symptoms, the mention of the soup. I pointed to the table, to the 3 bowls. We all ate from the same pot, but she served herself last. She was very proud of the recipe. They loaded Vanessa onto a gurney. David, pale and shaking, said he would ride with her. He turned to me in the doorway, a lost boy's look on a man's face. "Mom, will you—" "I'll follow in my car. I'll be right behind you." I gave his arm a firm squeeze. "Go." The ambulance doors slammed shut. The noise and lights receded, leaving a profound silence in their wake. I stood in the doorway of my now violated home. The dinner table was a still life of interrupted normalcy. 3 bowls, 3 spoons, half-eaten bread. And beneath my chair, a smartphone faithfully recording every second of silence. I walked back inside. I did not clear the table. I did not touch the pot of soup. These were now evidence, though I did not yet use that word. I retrieved my phone from under the chair. The recording was still running. I stopped it, saved the file, and created 2 backups on a cloud drive I used for storing digital photos of my grandchildren. The file name was simple, Sunday dinner. Then I collected my purse and my car keys. I locked the front door. The drive to the hospital was quiet. I did not speed. I used the time to order my thoughts, to rehearse the calm, concerned demeanor I would need to maintain. The anger was there, a hard, cold stone in my stomach, but it was useful. It focused me. The sadness for David was a separate ache, but I could not afford to indulge it yet. When I arrived, I parked and walked through the automatic doors into the bright, antiseptic chaos of the emergency room. I gave Vanessa's name at the desk and was directed to the waiting area. I chose a seat where I could see the doors to the treatment bays. I sat, hands folded, and waited for the consequences of Vanessa's special ingredient to fully reveal themselves. I waited for the doctor to come and ask his questions. I was ready. The young doctor disappeared behind the swinging doors, leaving me alone again with the hum of the waiting room. Time passed in uneven chunks, measured by the tread of nurses' shoes on linoleum and the intermittent crackle of the overhead PA system. I did not fidget. I observed the pattern of wear on the floor tiles near the reception desk. I calculated how long it might take for a stomach pump to be administered, assuming that was their first course of action. My mind, trained for research, defaulted to timelines and probabilities. It was nearly an hour before David emerged. He looked decades older. His shirt was rumpled and his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He walked toward me slowly, as if each step required conscious effort. He sank into the chair beside mine, the plastic groaning under his weight. He dropped his head into his hands. "They're pumping her stomach," he said, his voice muffled. "They're running toxicology. They asked me if she was depressed, if she might have taken something." He lifted his head and looked at me, his expression pleading for an anchor. "Mom, what's happening? She was fine. We were having dinner." I placed a hand on his back, a firm, steady pressure. "I don't know, David, but the doctors are doing what they can." I chose my next words with care. When I called 911, I mentioned what I heard about the soup. I thought they should know. He blinked, processing. What she whispered? That was a joke. She was just being silly. Was she? I asked, my tone neutral, not challenging. It seemed an odd thing to joke about right before becoming violently ill from that same soup. He stared straight ahead, conflict warring on his face. Denial was a powerful force, especially when the alternative was unthinkable. Before he could form a response, a different person approached us. A woman in her 50s, wearing a tailored blazer and slacks, her posture alert but not aggressive. A badge was clipped to her belt. A uniformed officer lingered a few steps behind her. "Mrs. Reynolds?" she asked, looking at me. Her gaze was assessing but not unkind. "Yes, I'm Eleanor Reynolds. This is my son David." "I'm Detective Sandra Miller." She showed her identification. "I'd like to speak with you both about the events this evening. Is there somewhere a little more private we can talk?" We were moved to a small, windowless consultation room, little more than a closet with a round table and 4 chairs. The air was stale. Detective Miller sat across from us. The uniformed officer remained by the door. David was trembling slightly. I sat with my spine straight, my hands resting on the table. The detective began with the basics, confirming names, relationships, the time of the dinner. She took notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. Her questions were precise. "Mrs. Reynolds, you placed the 911 call. You told the dispatcher you heard your daughter-in-law say the soup had something special in it. Can you elaborate on that?" I repeated the scene, sticking to factual observations. We were seated. David asked me a question. Vanessa leaned toward him and whispered, "The table is small. I have good hearing." The words were clear. "The soup has something special in it, just for her." She was looking at me when she said it. David shifted in his seat. "Detective, it was a private moment. A joke in poor taste, maybe. My mother might have misunderstood." Detective Miller turned her calm eyes to him. "Mr. Reynolds, did you hear what your wife said?" "No, not exactly." She was whispering. I just assumed. You assumed it was affectionate, she finished for him. He nodded, miserable. She looked back at me. You said she's the only one who ate that particular bowl. What did you mean by that? We all ate from the same pot, I explained, but Vanessa served herself last, from the bottom of the pot where the solids had settled. It was a different consistency. She commented on it. Then she made the remark. Then she became ill. I paused, letting the sequence hang in the air. My bowl and David's were more broth-based. We feel fine. It was a slight manipulation of the facts, but not a lie. The difference in our bowls was now the salient point. Detective Miller made another note. The soup and the dishes are still at your home? Yes. Nothing has been touched. The front door is locked. She nodded, then looked at David. Mr. Reynolds, has your wife been under any unusual stress? Any financial pressures? Marital difficulties? David's face flushed. No, nothing like that. We're happy. This is some terrible accident. A bad ingredient, maybe. Spoiled cream. The detective's expression remained neutral. She then turned her attention fully to me. Mrs. Reynolds, is there anything else you can think of that might be relevant? Any past incidents? Anything unusual in your daughter-in-law's behavior? This was the moment. I had planned for this moment since I pressed record on my phone. I reached into my purse and retrieved my smartphone. I unlocked it, navigated to the audio file, and placed the phone on the table between us. My movements were deliberate. I am a retired school librarian, I began, my voice even and clear. My memory is not what it used to be. My son and his wife lead busy lives. I like to preserve family moments. I met Detective Miller's gaze. I record our dinners sometimes. For my memory book, I find the sounds, the laughter, the ordinary chatter to be a comfort later. David stared at me, bewildered. You record our dinners? Occasionally, I said, not looking at him. Tonight I had started a recording just as we sat down. It was still running when everything happened. I slid the phone closer to the detective. You might want to check the audio. It captured the entire meal, including the whisper. The room went utterly still. The only sound was the faint buzz of the fluorescent light above us. Detective Miller looked from the phone to my face, her professional reserve giving way to a flicker of intense interest. She understood the magnitude of what I was handing her. This was not a hearsay account from a grieving mother-in-law. This was a digital witness. You have a recording of the evening, she stated, confirming. I do. From shortly before we began eating until after the paramedics arrived. I stopped it when I left for the hospital. I have not edited it. I can provide you with a copy. David made a small, choked sound. Mom, what is on it? The truth, David, I said quietly, finally looking at him, whatever that may be. Detective Miller picked up my phone carefully, as if it were a piece of fragile evidence, which it now was. I will need to take this as part of the investigation. We'll have our tech team make a forensic copy. You'll get a receipt. Of course, I said. The passcode is 8194, my late husband's birthday. She wrote it down. This could be very helpful, Mrs. Reynolds. We'll also need to send officers to secure your home and collect the physical evidence. The pot, the bowls. I nodded. I have a spare key in a magnetic box under the third flower pot on the left side of the front porch. The code for the alarm is 0915, David's birthday. David put his head in his hands again. The detective gave me a long, appraising look. I saw it then, a shift from viewing me as a possible vulnerable elder to recognizing a composed, strategic mind. She saw an ally, not a victim. Thank you for your cooperation, she said, her tone carrying a new layer of respect. We'll be in touch as soon as we've reviewed this. In the meantime, I'd advise you both to remain available. She stood, my phone in her hand. The uniformed officer opened the door for her. As she left, she glanced back at me, a curt, professional nod. The door clicked shut, leaving David and me in the silent, stale room with the terrible, unfolding truth hovering between us, made tangible by a simple audio file. David did not speak for a long time after Detective Miller left with my phone. He sat in the hard plastic chair, his elbows on the table, face buried in his hands. The overhead light accentuated the gray at his temples. I watched him, this man I had raised, and felt the cold stone of anger in my stomach harden into something even more durable. Resolve. He needed to break before he could rebuild. The recording would do that. We were allowed to see Vanessa briefly, once she was stabilized. She had been moved to a private room. Tubes ran from her arms, and a monitor tracked her heart rhythm in a steady green spike. She looked small and pale against the white sheets, a stark contrast to the vibrant, calculated woman who had entered my home. Her eyes were closed. David approached the bed, his hand hovering over hers before he gently took it. "Vanessa?" Her eyelids fluttered open. The glassy confusion cleared, replaced by a sharp, immediate fear when she saw me standing at the foot of the bed. Her gaze darted from me to David and back. "What happened?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "You got very sick, honey," David said, his own voice thick. "They pumped your stomach. The doctors are running tests." Her fingers tightened around his. "The soup." "The police are involved," I said, my tone matter of fact. "Detective Miller. They've taken the remains of the dinner for analysis." Vanessa's breath hitched. She looked at David, her expression pleading. It was an accident. A mistake. A bad herb, maybe. Before David could offer the comfort she sought, the door opened. Detective Miller entered, followed by a uniformed officer. She held a tablet computer in one hand. Her demeanor was different now. The earlier exploratory tone was gone, replaced by a focused certainty. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, nodding at me. Then she looked at Vanessa. "Ms. Clark Reynolds, I'm Detective Miller. I need to speak with you regarding the events of this evening." Vanessa tried to sit up, wincing. "I don't understand. I'm the victim here." "That remains to be seen," Miller replied, her voice neutral. She turned to David. "Mr. Reynolds, I need you to step outside with Officer Grayson for a moment." David looked stricken. "She's my wife. I should be here." "This is part of the investigation. It will be quicker if we speak alone." Her gaze was firm, leaving no room for argument. The uniformed officer gestured toward the door. David reluctantly released Vanessa's hand. He cast a lost look in my direction, but I merely nodded toward the door. He left, the officer following and closing the door behind them. The room was suddenly very quiet, save for the beep of the heart monitor. Detective Miller positioned herself where Vanessa could see her clearly. I remained by the window, a silent observer. "Ms. Clark Reynolds, your mother-in-law has provided us with an audio recording of the dinner," Miller began, placing the tablet on the bedside tray. "A recording she made for her personal archives. It captures the entire evening." Vanessa's face, already pale, turned the color of chalk. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "I have reviewed a portion of it," Miller continued. "The audio quality is quite clear. Would you like to hear a segment?" Without waiting for an answer, Detective Miller tapped the screen. The tinny yet unmistakable sounds of my dining room filled the hospital room. The clink of spoons, David's voice asking about a neighbor. Then the distinct intimate whisper, amplified by the tablet speaker. "The soup has something special in it, just for her." Miller paused the playback. The words seemed to hang in the sterilized air. Vanessa's chest rose and fell rapidly. The heart monitor's beep increased its pace. That's out of context. It was a private joke." "A private joke about poisoning your mother-in-law?" Miller's question was blunt. "The recording continues. It captures your subsequent illness. It captures Mrs. Eleanor Reynolds's call to 911, where she specifically reports your statement. It also contains a period of approximately 9 seconds of rustling and movement consistent with someone retrieving a phone and placing it on a chair. The timing coincides with Mrs. Reynolds dropping her napkin. I watched Vanessa's mind race, trying to find a crack, an explanation. She found none. Her eyes shot to me, filled with a venom so pure it seemed to burn away her weakness. "You," she hissed. "You scheming old—" "That's enough," Detective Miller interjected, her voice sharp. "Miss Clark Reynolds, you are now a suspect in an attempted homicide investigation. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." She continued the Miranda warning. Vanessa stared straight at me, ignoring the detective, her body trembling not from illness now, but from furious, trapped rage. The mask was not just cracked. It was shattered on the floor. When Miller finished, she said, "Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you?" Vanessa swallowed hard, finally looking at the detective. "I want a lawyer." "Of course," Miller made a note. "You are not under arrest at this moment, as you are still under medical care. However, an officer will remain outside this door. You are not to leave or have any visitors besides your attorney until we have completed our analysis of the physical evidence." Just then, the door opened. David stood there, having evidently heard the tail end of the rights being read. His face was a landscape of devastation. He had heard the recording from the hallway. He had heard his wife's whisper, clear as day. The last of his denial evaporated right there in the doorway. Detective Miller collected her tablet. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said to me, "I'll be in touch tomorrow. We'll need a formal statement." I nodded. She left, and the uniformed officer resumed his post in the hallway. David walked slowly to Vanessa's bedside. He did not take her hand. He just looked at her, as if seeing a stranger. "David," Vanessa whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. This one, for the first time, might have been real. "It's not what it sounds like. She set me up. She switched the bowls. She's trying to take you from me." He said nothing for a long moment. Then, his voice low and broken, he asked the only question that mattered. "Did you put something in my mother's soup?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but no denial came out. She looked from his shattered eyes to my impassive face and back. Her silence was the loudest confession of all. David took a step back, then another. He turned and walked out of the room. He did not look back. I followed him, leaving Vanessa alone with the beeping monitor and the consequences of her special ingredient. In the hallway, David was leaning against the wall, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The world he thought he knew was gone. The poison had worked, after all. It had just infected an entirely different system. The morning after the hospital, my house felt different. The air was still, heavy with the absence of the previous night's chaos. Police technicians had come and gone, taking the pot, the bowls, the spoons, even the trash bag from the kitchen bin. They left behind a faint smell of fingerprint powder and a palpable void. David had not come home. He had texted me a single word, "Hotel." I did not reply. He needed the space to fracture. Detective Miller called at 10 a.m. She asked if she could come by to take my formal statement. I said yes. Before she arrived, I made a pot of Earl Grey tea and set out 2 cups on the coffee table in the living room. The room was as I always kept it. Shelves of books, photographs of David growing up, a comfortable sofa with crocheted blankets I had made myself. It was a room that spoke of a quiet, organized life. I intended for it to serve as a stark contrast to the story I was about to tell. She arrived promptly, dressed in civilian clothes, slacks and a sweater, but her bearing was all professional. She accepted the tea with a nod of thanks. We sat across from each other. "How is your son?" she asked, her eyes watching me closely. "He is in shock," I said. "He will need time. And you?" "I am functioning, detective. The alternative is not acceptable." She gave a small, understanding tilt of her head. She opened her notebook. "I'd like to go through the events again for the official record. And then I'd like you to tell me about your relationship with Vanessa. Any history that might provide context." I recounted the dinner once more, my narrative unchanged. I described the whisper, the bowl switch, the phone recording. I presented it as a series of logical actions taken in response to a perceived threat. She wrote steadily. When I finished, she set her pen down. Mrs. Reynolds, the audio recording is compelling, but motive is a crucial component. Why would she do this, in your opinion? I took a sip of my tea. The warmth was steadying. Vanessa is a social climber. She married my son, who has a good career, but she saw our family as a stepping stone, not a destination. I believe she viewed me as the final obstacle. Obstacle to what? To control. To money. To a narrative where she was the sole mistress of David's world, without the complication of a mother with her own history and her own home. I paused, choosing which facts to present first. There have been incidents, small things, easy to explain away. A silver brooch that belonged to my mother went missing after Vanessa admired it. A set of antique linen napkins I inherited vanished after she helped me reorganize the linen closet. I said nothing. I had no proof, only a feeling. Detective Miller's expression remained neutral, but her attention was absolute. Go on. She would manipulate conversations, I continued. If David called me to chat, she would inevitably need him for something urgent in the background, cutting the call short. She began suggesting more and more frequently that this house was too large for me, that the stairs were a hazard, that a nice modern condo would be safer. She had brochures. Did your son support this idea? David is a kind man, but he is busy. He would hear her concerns and echo them gently. Mom, maybe she has a point about the stairs. Then he didn't see the pattern, only each individual point. I looked at the photograph of David on his graduation day, his smile full of future. Then, about 3 months ago, she became more direct. She mentioned a developer who was buying properties in this neighborhood. She said they were offering life-changing sums. She said I could take the money, travel, be free of the burden of upkeep. And you refused. I told her this house was not a burden. It was my home. My husband and I bought it. We raised our son here. Every mark on the doorframe where we measured David's height is a memory. She smiled and said, "Sentiment doesn't pay property taxes, Ellie." I recalled the cold precision of that smile. After that, her visits became less frequent, but her criticisms sharper. My cooking was too heavy. My decor was dated. I was holding David back from a more sophisticated social circle. Did you argue with her? Never. I was taught that dignity is silence when words are useless. I simply observed. I met the detective's gaze. I observed her growing frustration. I observed the way her eyes would calculate the value of things in this room. The whispering at dinner was not the beginning, Detective Miller. It was the culmination. She was silent for a moment, writing. Then she looked up. The special ingredient. Any idea what it might have been? I have a garden, I said. I grow herbs, some flowers. Vanessa has a small garden at their home as well, though she rarely tended it herself. She preferred ornamental plants, but last month she asked me several specific questions about wolfsbane and foxglove. She said she was researching a period novel for her book club. I told her both were highly toxic, beautiful but deadly. I thought nothing of it at the time. Now I wonder. Detective Miller made a swift note underlining it. We've subpoenaed her computer and financial records. We'll be searching their property today. You will likely find what you're looking for in her gardening shed, I said. She would not keep such a thing in the house, and she would consider it a fittingly ironic place, given our conversations. The detective studied me, a look of frank assessment. You've given this a great deal of thought. I am a librarian, Detective. Research and pattern recognition are my skills. When someone declares war on you, it is prudent to understand their tactics and their arsenal. She nodded slowly, closing her notebook. You've been very helpful, Mrs. Reynolds. This provides a clear roadmap. Motive, greed and control. Means, likely a plant-based toxin she had access to. Opportunity. A family dinner she insisted on cooking. She stood. The case is moving quickly. We should have preliminary toxicology results from the hospital by tomorrow. I walked her to the door. As she stepped onto the porch, she turned. You took a significant risk switching those bowls. If you were wrong— I was not wrong, I said, my voice flat and certain. And the risk was calculated. I had already secured the evidence. The only variable was whether David would believe his ears. Now he has no choice. Detective Miller held my gaze for a long moment. There was no pity in her eyes, only a kind of grim respect. I'll be in touch. I watched her drive away. Then I closed the door and locked it. I returned to the living room and collected the teacups. As I washed them in the sink, looking out at my own well-tended garden, I felt no triumph, only a cold, clean satisfaction. The roots of the poison were now exposed, and soon they would be ripped from the ground entirely. He came just before dawn. I was in the kitchen, not sleeping, waiting for the sunrise with a cup of chamomile tea. The knock was not tentative. It was 3 solid, heavy raps on the front door. I knew it was him. I unlocked and opened it. David stood on the porch, still in the same clothes from the hospital, rumpled and stale. His eyes were bloodshot, his face shadowed with stubble. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked past me into the house. The air around him vibrated with a tense, wounded energy. You should have come to me. His voice was low, ragged. He stood in the middle of the living room, not looking at me, staring at the space where our dinner table usually sat. I closed the door and followed him in. With what, David? A feeling, a missing brooch? Your wife's opinion that I am a burden? He whirled around. With a suspicion that my wife was trying to kill you. Yes, that's something you tell your son. The words burst out of him, fueled by 2 days of shock and betrayal. And what would you have done? I asked, my voice still quiet. I set my teacup down on the side table. Would you have believed me? Or would you have told me I was being dramatic? That Vanessa was just being helpful? That I was misinterpreting her concern? Would you have asked me gently if maybe I was getting a bit paranoid in my old age? He flinched as if I'd struck him. That's not fair. It is a question based on observable data, David. You dismissed every prior sign. You urged me to consider the condo. You echoed her concerns about the stairs. Your loyalty, however well-intentioned, was to the peace she manufactured. I kept my hands at my sides, my posture straight. If I had come to you with a wild accusation of poison, with no proof, you would have been forced to choose. And in that choice, without evidence, you would have chosen your wife. It is the natural order of things, and it would have destroyed us. So you set a trap instead? His voice cracked. You let her poison herself? You recorded it all like some spy? You didn't trust me enough to handle it? Now the anger rose, a clean, sharp spike cutting through my calm. Handle it? David, look at what it is. This was not a marital spat. This was not her speaking rudely to me. This was premeditated murder. She researched toxins. She procured them. She planned a dinner to administer one to me. She whispered her intention into your ear as a private joke. There is no handling that. There is only stopping it and proving it. I took a step toward him, my own composure thinning to show the steel beneath. You ask why I didn't trust you? Because a mother's first job is to protect her child, even from his own poor choices, even from the monster he invited into his home. If I had told you and you had confronted her without proof, she would have denied it. She would have wept. She would have made it seem like the delusion of a lonely, jealous old woman. And then what? She would have become more careful. She would have tried again, another way, and she might have succeeded. My failure would have been your lifelong guilt. I could not risk that for you. Tears streamed down his face, silent and unchecked. The anger was bleeding out of him, leaving only a vast, hollow pain. I didn't see it, he whispered, crumbling into an armchair. I didn't see any of it. How could I not see it? I knelt in front of him, taking his large hands in mine. They were cold. Because you are a good man. You see the best in people. You saw the charming, ambitious woman she presented to you. You wanted a happy family. She weaponized that goodness. That is not your failure. It is her crime. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for condemnation and finding none. What she said in the hospital about you switching the bowls, did you? Yes. I did not look away. When I heard the whisper, I had a choice. I could accuse her and start a war with no ammunition, or I could let her plan unfold and provide its own evidence. I chose the latter. I made sure the poison she intended for me was the poison she consumed. It was the only way to make the truth undeniable, even for you. He absorbed this, the tactical coldness of it. A part of him still wanted to recoil from the calculation, but a larger part, the part that had heard the recording, understood. She would have killed you. Yes. And I would have come home for Sunday dinner to find you dead, he said, the horror of the alternate reality finally crashing over him. She would have held me while I cried. She would have helped plan the funeral. She would have comforted me while she sorted through your things, sold this house, and moved on with our lives and her money. The realization was a physical blow. He bent forward, a guttural sob wrenching from his chest. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him as he shook. I felt the sobs deep in his bones. I did not cry. My tears had been spent in private, over months of small betrayals. Now I was the anchor. When the storm passed, he was exhausted, emptied out. Dawn had broken, casting a pale gray light through the windows. "What do I do now?" he asked, his voice small. "You survive," I said, releasing him and standing. "You let the police do their job. You get a lawyer for the divorce. You come home here for as long as you need. You heal. Can you ever forgive me?" The question was a child's question, full of raw need. "There is nothing to forgive you for," I said, and I meant it. "You were duped by a professional. My job was not to blame you, but to protect you from the consequences. That job is not over." He looked up at me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw a flicker of my son behind the devastation. Not the oblivious husband, but the boy who knew his mother's strength was a fortress. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I nodded. "I know. Now, let's have some proper tea, and then we will decide what happens next, together." The word hung in the air between us, a bridge over the wreckage. Together. It was no longer a given. It was a choice we had both just made, forged in the bitter taste of Vanessa's special ingredient. We walked into the kitchen, the first light of day finally reaching the table where it had all begun. The days that followed were a study in quiet contrast. David moved into his old bedroom. The sound of a man moving through the house again was both familiar and strange. We did not speak much about Vanessa or the investigation. We performed the rituals of normality, making breakfast, washing dishes, watching the evening news. It was a ceasefire, a mutual agreement to focus on the mechanics of living while the machinery of justice turned in the background. My garden became my sanctuary. While David made phone calls to his office and a divorce attorney, I went outside. It was late spring. I weeded the flower beds, pruned the rosemary, and checked the leaves of my tomato plants for blight. The physical work was calming. My hands in the soil felt like a reconnection to something honest and uncomplicated. I carefully avoided the section where I grew foxglove, its tall spires of purple bells looking deceptively gentle. I did not touch it. Detective Miller called on the third day. Her voice was brisk, professional. "Mrs. Reynolds, we have preliminary results and some significant developments. I can come by to update you and your son." She arrived within the hour. David joined us in the living room, his posture tense. Detective Miller declined tea this time. She had a folder with her. "First, the hospital toxicology report," she began, opening the folder. "Vanessa Reynolds had a significant concentration of digoxin in her system. It's a cardiac glycoside. In controlled doses, it's a heart medication. In the concentration found, it causes nausea, dizziness, cardiac arrhythmia, and can be fatal. I gave a single nod. Foxglove. Digitalis purpurea, yes, Miller confirmed. The active compounds are digoxin and digitoxin. The lab confirmed the source material was consistent with foxglove, not a pharmaceutical. David sat perfectly still, absorbing the clinical confirmation of the poison. Second, Miller continued, the search of their property. In Vanessa's gardening shed, behind a bag of potting soil, we found a small, unmarked plastic container holding dried, crushed leaves and flowers. Preliminary field test was positive for digitalis compounds. Our lab is confirming, but it's a match. We also found gardening gloves and a small mortar and pestle with residue. She pulled a photograph from the folder and placed it on the coffee table. It showed the clear plastic container inside an evidence bag. The contents were a crumbled, grayish green. It looked innocuous, like dried herbs for cooking. David stared at the photo as if it were a live serpent. She grew it? She had 3 foxglove plants in the corner of her perennial bed, Miller said. Well tended. They were not there last year, according to a neighbor we interviewed. She planted them this spring. The timeline was settling into place, cold and logical. Third, Miller said, turning a page in her notes, the forensic analysis of her personal laptop. Her internet search history, going back 5 months, included queries such as undetectable poisons, foxglove toxicity symptoms, lethal dose of digoxin, and how long does digoxin stay in the system. There were visits to gardening forums discussing the medicinal and toxic properties of common plants. She cleared her browser history 2 weeks ago, but our techs recovered the data. Each fact was a brick, building an inescapable wall. David put his head in his hands. Finally, Detective Miller said, her tone becoming graver, we obtained her financial records. 6 weeks ago, she opened a new, separate savings account at a different bank from her joint accounts with your son. 2 deposits were made into it, one for $5,000 from the sale of jewelry she listed online, a diamond pendant your son confirmed was a gift from him, and another for $15,000 from a personal line of credit she took out against our joint home equity. David's head snapped up at this, his eyes wide with fresh betrayal. The line of credit was approved based on your son's income and signature, which she appears to have forged on the application. What was the money for? David asked, his voice hollow. The stated purpose on the loan application was home landscaping renovations, but given the timing placed right after her intensive research period and before the attempted poisoning, we believe it was a getaway fund, or perhaps a fund to sustain her after your mother's tragic sudden passing before the life insurance and estate sale proceeds would come through. The room was silent. The pieces were no longer just pieces. They were a complete, horrifying picture. Greed, premeditation, method. Has she said anything? I asked. Her lawyer is advising silence, but the physical evidence is overwhelming. The digital evidence is explicit. The motive, as you outlined, is clear. The district attorney is preparing charges of attempted first-degree murder, forgery, and fraud. It's a solid case. Detective Miller closed her folder. I wanted you to hear it from me. The arrest will happen as soon as she is medically cleared to be discharged from the hospital, likely tomorrow. It will be public. You may see it on the news. David stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to us. His shoulders were rigid. Thank you, Detective, I said, for your thoroughness. You provided the road map, she said simply, standing to leave. She looked at David's back, then at me. Will he be all right? In time, I said. It was both a hope and a statement of fact. After she left, I remained seated. David eventually turned around. The shock was gone, replaced by a deep, weary anger. She forged my name. She was going to kill you, and she was going to use my money to run away afterward. Yes, I want to be there, he said, his jaw tight. "When they arrest her. I need to see it." I considered this. It will be ugly. I need to see the end of it, so I can start to believe it's real. I nodded. "Then we will both be there." That afternoon I returned to my garden. The sun was warm on my back. I knelt by the compost bin and began turning the dark, rich material with a pitchfork. The process of decay creating new life. It felt appropriate. The net was closed. The legal gears were turning with a certainty that was satisfying in its impersonal efficiency. Vanessa's plan, born in malice and nurtured in secret, had been uprooted and exposed to the light. It was withering now, just like the crushed leaves in that evidence bag. My own garden, my own home, felt secure again. The poison had been identified, contained, and was being removed. The only task left was to ensure nothing like it could ever take root here again. We arrived at the hospital in silence. David drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I sat in the passenger seat looking out at the passing streets, my mind clear and focused. We were not there as a family. We were there as witnesses to an ending. Detective Miller met us in the lobby. She was accompanied by another detective, a younger man with a serious expression, and 2 uniformed officers. The air around them was all business. "She's been medically cleared for discharge and transfer," Miller informed us quietly. "Her attorney is upstairs. We'll be taking her into custody in her room. You can observe from the hallway if you wish. The door will be open." We took the elevator up. The familiar hallway felt different in the daylight, less charged with panic, more administrative. We positioned ourselves to the side of the open doorway to Vanessa's room. Inside, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, dressed in the clothes David had brought from home days ago, a pair of jeans and a simple sweater. She looked diminished, her hair flat, her makeup absent. Her lawyer, a man in a suit that seemed too expensive for the setting, stood near the window talking to her in a low voice. Detective Miller entered first, her badge visible. The other detective and the officers remained just inside the door. "Vanessa Clark Reynolds," Miller said, her voice formal and carrying. "You are under arrest for the attempted first-degree murder of Eleanor Reynolds, forgery, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As Miller recited the Miranda rights, Vanessa's head snapped up. Her eyes, wide and desperate, scanned the room and landed on David in the hallway. For a second, a pathetic hope flickered there. Then she saw me, standing beside him, calm and watchful, and that hope twisted into pure, unadulterated hatred. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, a clear signal to stay quiet. Miller finished the recitation. "Do you understand these rights?" Vanessa ignored the question. She stared at David. "David, please, you can't let them do this. This is her. She's doing this. She set me up." Her voice was rising, losing its cultivated polish, becoming shrill. David said nothing. His face was a stone mask, but I could see a muscle jumping in his jaw. "Ms. Clark Reynolds," Miller said, stepping forward, "it's time to come with us." "No!" Vanessa jerked her arm away from her lawyer. The careful facade, already cracked, now fully shattered under the weight of the handcuffs Miller produced. "You want to know why? You want a motive? Fine, look at her." She pointed a shaking finger at me. She was always there, in his ear, in our house, in our marriage. That house should have been ours. The money should have been ours. She was an old woman clinging to a past that was dead. She was taking my husband. Her words poured out in a furious, toxic stream. All he ever talked about was mom this and mom that. I gave him a new life. I gave him class. And she was the anchor holding him back in that musty, old-fashioned world. I just wanted her gone. I wanted what was mine. She was crying now, angry, ugly tears. She was supposed to die quietly. It would have been a tragedy. We would have been sad, and then we would have moved on. We would have been free. She took that from me. She tricked me. The room was silent except for her ragged breathing. Her lawyer looked at the ceiling, a picture of professional dismay. Detective Miller's expression didn't change. The evidence suggests you tricked yourself, ma'am. The foxglove was from your garden. The searches were on your computer. The money was in your secret account. You prepared the soup. You announced your intention on a recording. This was your plan. Vanessa seemed to deflate, the outburst leaving her hollow. She looked at David, searching for any scrap of the devotion she had manipulated for years. David, I loved you. I did this for us. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, cold, and absolutely final. You tried to murder my mother. There is no us. There is only you and the mess you made. It was the last thread cut. Vanessa's face collapsed. The officers moved in, taking her by the arms. Miller guided her hands behind her back and secured the handcuffs with a precise click. The sound was small, metallic, definitive. "Let's go," one of the officers said, his tone impersonal. They walked her out of the room. As she passed us in the hallway, she kept her head down, refusing to look at either of us. The spectacle was over. The elegant, calculating social climber was led away in handcuffs, flanked by police, past the curious stares of nurses and orderlies. It was a perp walk in a hospital corridor, a far cry from the dinner party she had envisioned as her triumphant stage. We watched them until they turned the corner toward the elevators. The silence they left behind was profound. Detective Miller stayed behind for a moment. She looked at David. "You okay?" He nodded once, a stiff movement. "I will be." She then looked at me. Her gaze was acknowledging. It said, "It's done. The DA will contact you about the next steps, trial, plea deals. It'll be a process, but the hard part is over." "Thank you, Detective," I said. She gave a brief nod and followed her colleagues. David and I stood alone in the antiseptic hallway. The beeps and murmurs of the hospital continued around us, indifferent. He let out a long, shuddering breath, as if he'd been holding it for years. "She said she loved me," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "She may have believed she did," I said, "but her love was a condition. It required removing all obstacles, including me. That is not love. It is possession." He turned to me, his eyes exhausted but clear. "Let's go home, Mom." We walked back to the car. The sun was high in the sky now. The world outside the hospital looked ordinary, people going about their days. A chapter had closed, not with a bang, but with the clinical click of handcuffs and the silent, steady weight of justice finally delivered. The poison was in custody. We were free to go. The car ride home from the hospital was silent, but it was a different silence than before. The tension that had held David rigid for days seemed to have drained out of him, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. When we walked into the house, he went straight to the living room and sat down on the sofa, staring at nothing. I did not ask him questions. I went to the kitchen and put the kettle on. I made 2 mugs of strong, sweet tea, the way I used to make for him when he was a boy and had scraped his knee. I brought them in and handed one to him. He took it automatically, the warmth seeming to pull him back into the room. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. We drank our tea. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating motes of dust in the air. The house was quiet, but the quiet no longer felt ominous. It felt like recovery. Later, David went upstairs to shower and change. I heard the water run for a long time. When he came down, he was wearing an old pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt from his college days that he'd found in a drawer. He looked younger and terribly vulnerable. "What do I do now?" he asked, the same question from the dawn conversation, but now stripped of anger, filled only with uncertainty. "You rest," I said. "You eat. You let the legal process run its course. You meet with your divorce attorney, one thing at a time." He nodded, accepting the simplicity of the list. "I should go to the house, our house, to get some things. Do you want me to come with you?" He thought about it. "Yes, I don't think I can walk in there alone." We went the next morning. The air in the house he had shared with Vanessa was cold and still, the thermostat programmed down. It smelled of her perfume and lemon polish, a ghost of a life that was now definitively over. David moved through the rooms like a stranger, mechanically filling a suitcase with clothes and a box with files from his home office. He did not go into the master bedroom. I did not enter it either. In the kitchen, he stopped, looking at the sleek, expensive appliances Vanessa had insisted on. "She hated your kitchen," he said quietly. "She said it was quaint. She never understood why I liked eating there." "It was a kitchen," I said, "not a showroom." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Exactly." We took the boxes and the suitcase and left. He did not look back as he locked the door. The following days established a new, fragile rhythm. David worked from home on his laptop. I tended my garden. We shared meals. The conversations were often practical. What to do with the joint assets, the timeline for the divorce, the updates from Detective Miller about the plea deal the district attorney was offering Vanessa to avoid a trial. Her lawyer was negotiating, but the evidence was incontrovertible. She would spend years in prison. One evening, after a simple dinner of baked chicken and rice, David brought a large cardboard box down from the attic. It was labeled, "David's School Stuff." We sat on the living room floor and went through it. Old report cards, art projects, photographs. There was a picture of him at 10, grinning with a missing front tooth, his arm around my waist. There was another of him and his father building a treehouse. He held that one for a long time. "I wanted a family like that," he said finally. "Simple, solid. I thought I was building it with her." "You were building on the foundation your father and I gave you," I said. "She wanted to demolish the foundation and build something new in her own image. That is not how a family works." He put the photos back in the box. "I'm sorry I didn't see it." "I am not," I said. "I am glad you are a man who sees the best in people. That is a quality. It just needs to be paired with wisdom. Wisdom sometimes has to be learned the hard way." He looked at me. "You're not angry with me?" "I was never angry with you, David. I was afraid for you. There is a difference." A weight seemed to lift from his shoulders then, a weight he had been carrying since the hospital hallway. The guilt he had been nurturing met the unconditional absolution I had always held for him, and it dissolved. That night, for the first time, he slept through the night without pacing the halls. A week after the arrest, we were in the kitchen washing dishes. The sun was setting. He dried a plate and put it in the cupboard. I think I'd like to have some people over soon. Not a big thing. Maybe just the Daniels from next door and Aunt Clara. A real dinner." I handed him a wet glass. "That sounds like a good idea." "Will you cook?" he asked. "I mean, I'll help. But will you make your pot roast? The one with the carrots and potatoes?" It was his favorite meal from childhood, a meal of comfort, of safety. "I will," I said. "And we will use the good china, the one with the gold trim that your grandmother left me." He smiled, a real smile that touched his eyes. It was the first one I had seen in what felt like years. "She'd like that." We finished the dishes. The house was clean, quiet, and whole. The pieces were not yet reassembled into what they were before. They never would be, but they were being gathered and held with care. A new structure was possible. It would be built on honesty, on the hard-earned wisdom of survival, and on the simple, enduring fact that we were still here, together, in the home that had withstood the poison. The healing had begun in earnest, not with dramatic gestures, but with clean dishes, old photographs, and the plan for a pot roast. 1 month to the day after the dinner that changed everything, the house was filled with voices again. This time, they were the right ones. David was in the kitchen with me, chopping carrots for the salad. My old neighbors, Martha and Ben Daniels, were in the living room with my sister Clara, their laughter a warm, familiar sound. The table was set with my mother's good china, the ones with the delicate gold trim. The pot roast, the one David had requested, simmered in the oven, filling the house with the scent of garlic and herbs and safety. It was not a celebration. It was a reclamation. We sat down to eat. The conversation was easy, flowing around safe topics. Ben's garden, Clara's new cat, a funny movie David had seen. Vanessa's name was not mentioned. Her absence was a presence we had all silently agreed to ignore, a shadow dispelled by the light in the room. David participated, his smiles reaching his eyes more often than not. He looked like my son again, not the haunted stranger from the hospital. As we finished the main course, David tapped his knife gently against his water glass. The soft ringing quieted the table. He looked at me, then at our guests. "I just want to say thank you," he began, his voice steady, "to all of you for being our family, and to my mother." He paused, gathering his words. For having the courage I didn't have. For protecting us both when I couldn't see what needed protecting. I'm learning that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet decision to survive. Martha dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. Ben nodded soberly. Clara reached over and squeezed my hand. Then they all looked at me. I had not planned to speak, but the moment felt necessary. I lifted my own glass of iced tea. "David is too kind," I said. "What I did was not extraordinary. It was logical. When you are presented with a clear threat, you neutralize it. The lesson I would offer is simpler. Trust your instincts, and if you can, back them up with evidence." I allowed a small, dry smile. A librarian's advice. A soft chuckle moved around the table. We clinked glasses. The toast was not to victory, but to resilience, to the simple, profound act of continuing. After dessert, a peach cobbler Clara had brought, our guests helped clear the table, then said their goodbyes with long hugs and promises to do it again soon. David walked them to the door. The house settled back into a comfortable quiet, full of the echoes of laughter and the lingering warmth of company. David insisted on doing the washing up. "You cooked. I'll clean. That's the new rule." I did not argue. I went into the living room and sat in my armchair. The evening had been a success, a stitch pulling the fabric of our lives back together. But one thread remained, a digital thread. I picked up my smartphone from the side table. I navigated through my files, past the photos of the garden and the grandkids, to the folder labeled Archives. There it was, the file named Sunday Dinner. I opened it. The audio waveform displayed on the screen, a jagged mountain range of sound frozen in time. I did not press play. I did not need to hear it again. The whisper, the clinks, the panic, they were etched into my memory with perfect, unwanted clarity. This file had served its purpose. It had been the scalpel that excised the poison. But now, holding onto it felt like holding onto the poison itself. David came in, drying his hands on a dish towel. He saw the phone in my hand, saw the screen. He stopped, understanding immediately. "Are you going to delete it?" he asked quietly. "It has served its purpose," I said. "The police have their copies. The case is closed." She accepted the plea deal this morning, 15 years. The news had come in a brief email from Detective Miller. Vanessa had admitted to the attempted murder in exchange for the fraud and forgery charges being dropped. There would be no trial. It was over. David absorbed this final piece of information. He simply nodded. There was nothing left to say about it. I looked back at the screen. My finger hovered over the file name. This small digital object held so much malice, so much calculated evil, but it also held my victory, my cleverness, my cold, precise retaliation. Letting it go felt like a choice not to define myself by that moment any longer. I had been a victim, then a strategist, then an agent of justice. Now I wanted to be just Eleanor again, a grandmother, a mother, a woman in her home. I selected the file, a menu popped up. I tapped delete. A confirmation dialog appeared. Permanently delete Sunday dinner? This action cannot be undone. I tapped delete. The waveform vanished from the screen. The file name disappeared from the list. It was gone from my device. The cloud backups had been deleted last week. The only copies that remained were in evidence lockers and police servers where they belonged. I placed the phone back on the table. A deep, quiet breath filled my lungs, a breath I felt I had been holding since I first heard that whisper across the table. David came and sat on the sofa opposite me. "Okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I was. We sat in a comfortable silence for a while, listening to the grandfather clock tick in the hallway. The house was clean, peaceful, ours. The poison was gone, locked away in every sense of the word. The recipe for our future was not yet written, but the key ingredients were present: safety, truth, and the hard-won wisdom to appreciate both. "Coffee?" David asked eventually. "That sounds perfect," I said. He went to make it. I remained in my chair, looking out at the dark window where my own reflection was visible, superimposed over the peaceful night outside. My face was calm. My silver hair was neat. My hands rested steadily on the arms of the chair. The story was over. The quiet that followed was not the quiet of dread, but the quiet of peace, earned and deeply felt. I was home.